think of this as, if you like the report, the highlights reel. If you don't, the blooper reel. But it'll be 10 nuggets, as it were, as opposed to the overall picture, which Alan, I think, has given a very good view on. Just very quickly, what we're extracting these 10 or so findings from is the Dealership of Tomorrow project, DOT, funded by NADA, who I think you know well. It was intended to provide members who are franchised new car dealerships, so not independent used car dealers, 18,000 new car dealers franchised, not the 30 to 40,000, depending how you count them, used car dealerships, to provide thought starters and insights for their own planning processes. The old joke goes that for dealers, the future is the end of the month. And so NADA wanted to kind of push that horizon further out. Launched in 2015. We worked on it in 2016. Version 1.0 came out in 2017. We did a version 2.0, which was my last business trip this year, February of this year, out to NADA in Las Vegas to present. And then, of course, the virus hit. And then we've done a micro or mini update since then. If you contact me, I guess through FICO or whatever, or NADA, copies of all these presentations and reports are available. Combined, they're about 270 pages of text or 140 slides. That's why we're not presenting them today. All the versions are divided into two work streams inside the store. And sort of imagine no changes to massive changes to technology, but just sort of how things might evolve that way. And then let's add in all the four horsemen of the carpocalypse, as they're called: autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, mobility services, and connected car. And so that's how these reports are all structured. And so because it's so long, I can't summarize it here. So I will run quickly through 10 findings that meet the criteria of perhaps being unexpected for you and possibly useful, and may extend a little bit beyond the world of car dealerships alone. Things we found out in this over the course of this now 5-year project, which is still ongoing. So here we go, top 10. I'm not sure if this is Johnny Carson or maybe it was David Letterman who used to do these things, but here's the list. One thing we heard a lot about in the outside world is, aren't fewer people getting their driver's licenses, and therefore won't there be fewer people buying cars? Well, no. What has happened actually is the youngest cohorts are indeed deferring their driver's licenses, so that the percentage of the population that's, say, 16 years old that has a license has dropped dramatically. Then if you look at 17-year-olds, it's less dramatic. By the time you get about 23 or 24, they've caught up, especially if they have a child. On that end of the pipeline, as it were, we're seeing deferment as opposed to avoidance. Oh, and by the way, behind the statistics about 16-year-olds not getting as many licenses as before, about half the states in America do not allow you to get your license until you're 17 or 18. So, of course, that hits the 16-year-old cohort. That's not usually made clear when we see the headlines. So on the input side, as it were, we have slower input, but catching up by the mid-20s. Crucially, cohorts, such as myself, are staying on the road much longer, maybe to the detriment of the safety of those around us. But this is no longer a matter of retiring when you're 65 and puttering off to the golf course for a few years. People in their 60s, 70s, and 80s and more still driving has grown dramatically over time. The percentage of the American population with a driver's license in 1980 was 84%. In 2018, it was 87%. So we do not see a decline in the rate of driver's licenses. Okay, next. Fine. There we go. Aren't the big public chains consolidating the dealership industry? Alan mentioned this. I have an immense respect for AutoNation and Lithia and all the rest, and they may very well consolidate the industry at some point. But to date, not really. The big six, AutoNation, Lithia, Asbury, Sonic, et cetera, had 7% of new retail volume in the year 2000 and 8% in 2018. Will they gain share? I can only imagine they will gain share. But you can see at this particular rate, it's hardly a stampede. To me, I think most of the scale economies in retailing cars are exhausted at the level of 40, 50, or 70 stores, and going to 200 doesn't do much more for you. And Alan mentioned this as well, isn't the internet acting to reduce the number of new car stores, as it is easy now to shop across geographies with the internet. So in the hypothetical extreme case, you have one Ford dealership in Omaha, and everybody buys from them because they have the biggest selection and lowest price. And then they ship the cars all over the country. And there are dealerships that do that. But about half of Americans still buy, even those who use the internet for shopping, still buy from within a 10-mile radius of their location. And so I do think eventually we may see a decline in the number of dealerships. But as Alan showed in nice chart form, the number of dealership rooftops has actually edged upwards since the Great Recession. I think he's got 18.3 because he uses a different data series than I have at 18.2 or so. But yeah, OEMs have realized that maybe it's a good thing to have a physical store. And by the way, as we're thinking about moving more and more towards, and are moving more and more towards clicks and less bricks, we've met the digital natives coming the other direction. Warby Parker has hundreds of retail outlets now. Wayfair, the online digital native furniture store, has opened its first permanent store. Amazon, with food, Casper with mattresses, etc. Probably the way to look at this is not extrapolation, but equilibrium. Number of owners, of course, has declined at the rate of about 2% annually since 2010, as people do throw in the towel. But that's hardly a stampede for the doors. Maybe that'll change with COVID. Is there an affordability crisis? Again, something you hear about all the time. That we'd sell more cars if they had lower prices. Well, certainly I cannot argue with the concept of selling more cars if we had lower prices. But what's been really bizarre in this downturn is as sales volumes have dropped, you would think we'd be cutting prices to get cars moved out and sold, and instead we're seeing price increases. The average car, and this is after all incentives, discounts, and everything else, has climbed from 31,000 in 2017 to now 35,000 last month. And OEMs have dropped many of their cheaper models. Even the Honda Fit is now going to be discontinued, not because it's too expensive, but because nobody seems to want something that costs less than $35,000. Very interesting to have a recession where volume drops, but price goes up. Another thing has been talked about a lot in recent years. I'm speaking now before COVID, which has changed this a bit, is won't the shift of the American population into the cities reduce the demand for cars? If everybody lives in Manhattan and downtown San Francisco, they don't need a car. That'll hurt car sales and thus dealers. Well, it's what shift? Numerous city centers have indeed revitalized. I live in Cleveland, 20 years ago in Cleveland, downtown had 6 people. Now it has 15 or so. Small joke. But the American population as a whole continues to favor the suburbs. The urban population was 30% of America in 1980 and has grown. It's a little over a third now, but the suburbs have grown faster from 45% to just over half. The rural areas have taken it on the chin, but America remains a country of suburbs, and with a growing extent is a country of suburbs, and suburbs are the happy hunting ground of car ownership. With COVID, of course, we may see even faster movement in this direction. Okay, moving on. Why is growth in the EV market share so slow in the United States to date? By the way, our forecast is for market share of EVs to triple by 2025. We love polar bears and icebergs. We have nothing against EVs. And it's seen a tripling of demand, but it hasn't been very fast growth so far. There's lots of stuff about range and charging infrastructure and everything else. But what it really boils down to is right now, battery vehicles seem to mostly be conquesting buyers from hybrids rather than from internal combustion engines. EV share rose threefold between 2014 and 2019. That's a battery electric vehicle like a Bolt or a Tesla. Hybrid share fell 2.9 to 2.4, and the combined total rose only 20%. In short terms, battery electric vehicles are conquesting buyers who are already green, who are driving hybrids, and has done very little to conquest regular car owners like a Jeep Grand Cherokees or something. That'll change. Why has progress in autonomous vehicles been so slow, with rollout dates steadily pushed back? Well, the AV challenge proved to be much harder than we thought. No surprise there. One way to look at this is with 2 different views through the binoculars. Through one lens, we see 35,000 people die every year on the road in America, and that's 35,000 too many. And we think we need robots that'll be flawless to drive that to zero. On the other hand, as we develop the vehicles, we find out that the fatality rate is about 1 per 100 million miles. That's not a typo. 1 fatality per 100 million miles driven in America annually. And it's really hard, as you know, if you've been rebooting your phone or computer lately, to find a computer system that can manage that kind of uptime. Does an increasing congestion put a damper on owning and using cars? And I'll keep accelerating here and we'll get everything done as fast as we possibly can. What congestion? Total congestion does grow. That is, if we count the population of the United States, it goes up. If we count all the people with cars, they go up. If we count all the places they can live and work, those increase. More cars on the road, total hours spent on the road goes up. But if we look at it per person, there's not an awful lot of bad stuff happening. In 1980, okay, which is now 40 years ago, the average one-way individual commute was 22 minutes. In 2018, it was 27 minutes. This is hardly, Delhi or Mumbai-like gridlock. My apologies to anybody from India on the call. Oh, and by the way, if you actually ask people what their ideal commute time is, they say 20 minutes. Not 0, 20 minutes to adjust on the way to work, to listen to all the radio stations that your significant other wouldn't let you do if they were in the car with you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of talk about congestion in the abstract, and certainly if you are backed up on the Bay Bridge later today, you live and breathe congestion. But if we're talking about the 330 million Americans, they're saying an average one-way commute for me should be 20 minutes. Mine is currently 27. What's the big deal? Next, oops, sorry, get my cursor back. Weren't mobility services like ride hail supposed to wipe out car ownership by now? Weren't we, and this all sounds defensive, I guess it is, but I like to look at facts, and you'll notice every single one of these 6 things has real facts in them as opposed to just dueling white paper assertions. Weren't mobility services like ride hail supposed to wipe out car ownership by now? If everybody's taking an Uber everywhere, why own your own car? Well, they may indeed do that at some point. But if we look at metrics like cars per capita in the United States, still going up, though slowly. America has more cars right now on the road than it has driver's licenses. We can't even drive all the ones we have, and we keep acquiring more of them. Not only that, but when we look at cities like San Francisco, New York, Washington, Portland, ground zero for ride hail, I can provide the chart if anybody's interested, we see higher car ownership after ride hail arrives in these cities. That is, after ride hail comes to San Francisco or New York or Philadelphia, we see household ownership of cars per household actually going up. So I see mobility services as more diversified portfolio of how to get around, and these things will coexist in equilibrium. No one takes an airplane to go to the restaurant next door. No one takes a scooter to go to Japan. So it's horses for courses, and I think we'll see rideshare slot into the portfolio of mobility services that people own and deploy. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it and say, oh, ignore it. Scooters will eventually drive cars from the road. But at cities with deployment of ride-hail services, we can see no impact on car ownership. Let me make that clear, none. Again, we can provide the data if you're interested. And then lastly, anything changed dramatically since the COVID update, since the COVID encroachment? Lots of things have changed. I'll just hit one thing in particular, and Alan mentioned this. Dealers have accelerated or had accelerated for them their move towards online/digital/low-touch sales. We were already headed this way, and now we've headed faster that way. I don't know if we'll stay that way. We stopped flying on airplanes right after 9/11, and 2 years later, we were back at the same numbers as we were before. But let's say this, does continue, which I think is likely. It's interesting. We maybe feared it, and now maybe we're sort of welcoming it. Perhaps unexpectedly, early data shows strongly increasing profitability, which Alan mentioned. So we have sales way down, price up, and gross margins are up, the highest in over a decade, partly due to a shortage of inventory, but also one other thing which I'll hypothesize, and sales expenses are down. If we have a physical sales process, if you've got one really good salesperson in your dealership, they spend 3 hours with a family, they sell them a car. They spend another 3 hours, they sell them another car. If that person can be leveraged digitally online, they can handle probably 4 or 5 different transactions almost in parallel over a few hours and multiply their ability to sell cars. So high gross margins, low expenses, high prices looks pretty good. So maybe we found a way to actually get this to work in a way that doesn't suck profitability out of the dealership, it actually increases it. My one final comment on here is on online effects. This is a personal observation. I do not have facts to back it up. But part of what is at least a hypothesis for why gross margins are so high right now is, as people say, I don't want the pain and suffering of going to the dealership and all kind of stuff. I want to do it online. Fine. But we see people who move to online dropping their tendency to haggle. That is, I don't like being in the dealership. I don't like being in the F&I cubicle, et cetera, et cetera. But when I'm there, I'm going to ask for another $400 off. Online, they seem less disposed to haggle. And we may be getting higher price realization because of this. Again, it's just a hypothesis. We don't have good data yet. But think about the last time you bought something on Amazon and you asked for a price discount. Rest my case. The moral of this story, of these 10 points pulled out almost at random from hundreds of pages of work, are always look beyond the headlines, beyond the accepted wisdom. Look at the facts. When people say things like young people aren't getting their driver's licenses anymore, say, well, are older people keeping them longer? Remember to look for the whole story.